Further analyse this, here in the studio, we're joined now by Ashish Prashar, a former advisor to the Middle East peace envoy and political strategist to the Biden campaign. Thank you very much for coming in to talk to us, Ashish. First of all, it was under the Biden administration that the US rejoined UNESCO. So let me start by asking you your opinion on the Trump administration yet again withdrawing.
Right, this is the second time they've withdrawn for a wild number of reasons, but it's really about the admittance of Palestine, right? This is consistent with US foreign policy under various American presidents, and it's been accelerated under Donald Trump, which is, the erasure of Palestine and the Palestinians. And this is also consistent with what the occupation wants the US to do, which is change international norms and order, right? You've seen Israel and via the US attack the UN, UNIFIL, UNRWA, all these other organizations on its behalf, effectively, defunding them, but also delegitimizing them, attacking director generals that run them, calling them anti-Semitic, and using, propaganda, effectively, that could come out of the Knesset to attack these organizations and delegitimize everything that was set up in the international order. And as we witness this, remember, it was the US and Western allies who are backing this occupation that is committing this genocide, who are tearing up diplomatic norms, who are tearing up, the protection of the use of violence, like what it's really used for, humanitarian law, and they're doing this all in the protection of an entity that is committing a genocide before us. And what's going to be left after that, right? People said that post-World War II, this order was, to take us on a path of peace, take us on a path of prosperity. But what I could say to that is, the West didn't give the world civilization. It's kind of interrupted it now.
On that, we've heard from Gideon Sai, Israel's foreign minister. He said that it's designed to promote justice, this necessary, quote, necessary step to withdraw from UNESCO. Is the alliance between the US and Israel overshadowing the prospect of this peace here that we're referring to, which is why it was set up in the first place?
Well, in essence, the US is kind of holding the world hostage. You and I have talked this before, where they've vetoed numerous orders for a ceasefire in Gaza or in Palestine. They're destroying institutions. They've sanctioned the ICC. They said the ICJ's rulings don't matter, even though they accepted them on other nations. They have delegitimized everything on the behalf of this entity. Effectively, they're trying to create a new world environment that is ruled by hyper-militarization, right? You've seen the only institution the US is willing to invest in and is actually forcefully asking its allies to invest in is NATO, right? We're asking Britain, France, Germany to increase their budgets to 5%. Only a handful of European countries are questioning that right now. Slovenia and some of the other foreign saying, why are we spending so much on an organization that is already humongous, already over-militarized, already spread all over the world? Well, that's the only entity. And what it shows me is the future of the world really looks like this. If the US and Israel, any of its allies want something, they're not going to use diplomatic norms, not going to use institutions, they're not going to talk about it at the UN. They're going to use brute force to get what they want. And that's the danger of this. This is just a signal, right? UNESCO is fodder for the base at home. We're not going to spend on aid. We're not going to spend on cultural institutions that are woke. But in essence, it's also at a global level, while it's fun for the base to say, oh, we're not going to help foreigners or we're not going to care about these things, at an international level, it's significant because it's basically ending any cooperation nations have. Your colleague mentioned WHO already. They're already out of that. The thing is, UNESCO will survive this because China and other people stepped in. If you remember the last time the US pulled out, they were funding 30% of it. Now they only fund 8%. So people will step in, but it's the delegitimization of being able to diplomatically do anything together.
But like you say, UNESCO will have been prepared for this, and funding-wise, it may not be massively affected. But what are the wider implications then that we're looking at with this move by the Trump administration?
Yeah, it further destabilizes the international order. In the end of the day, the US will have its foreign policy that protects people it cares about in the end. Like I said, they will use violence and military force to get what they want. They will not talk to people diplomatic. But here's the other thing with UNESCO. It's about culture, right? And that's the one thing I've talked about several times in conversations with my colleagues at the UN. You've seen through Gaza and Israel and Palestine and everything that's happening right now, Israel's depravity in destroying cultural institutions. They've bombed thousands of mosques. The oldest church in the world is in Gaza. They bombed it. Who else did that in Iraq? and Iran and everything else. Who else does that? The only two petulant nations that have no value of global culture are the United States and the Israeli occupation. They literally think history starts with their creation, and anything before that has no value. That is the mindset of people who are not indigenous to land. That is the mindset of people who've stolen land. That is the mindset of countries that only see capitalism and extraction as their end goal. That is not the mindset of of an ally or a country that sees a future for this entire planet. Because the reality is, like, before colonization, before this, I've always had this argument that, that if we give people's history back, from the museums, they'll destroy it. Who took it in the first place, right? And the other thing is, those sites that from Iraq through to Turkey to Palestine have survived like centuries of empire, of colonization, everything. The only people who've taken missiles and bombs to it are the United States and Israel. And they should be held accountable for that.
You make a good point, Ashish. The other thing I did want to ask you is, why is the decision to admit the state of Palestine being cited as, quote, highly problematic by the Trump administration?
Well, the US foreign policy, whether it's a soft policy under Biden, I wouldn't call it soft anymore, given he is the architect of this genocide, but a soft policy under the Democrats, which is kind of like give fodder to the Palestinians, but don't actually create a state, or with the Republicans, a hyper-extermination of Palestinians. The reality is, US foreign policy, for as long back as Bill Clinton, has been the erasure of Palestine. And anybody that lets Palestine into any institution legitimizes Palestine. What should really be happening in the international order should be the Israeli occupation should be removed from every international institution, from the UN to UNESCO, to every other organization out there where it can show it's legitimate. Think about apartheid South Africa. The thing that ended it in the end wasn't just sanctions. It was the fact that they were not welcome anywhere. They were not in any international order. Think about where that went to. That went to sports. They shouldn't be in FIFA. They shouldn't be in the Olympics. They should be isolated. That's what should be happening. We shouldn't be eliminating entire organizations because they allowed Palestine in. We should be actually supporting organizations to remove the Israeli occupation from those organizations.
Ashish, really appreciate your thoughts and your time. Thank you for coming into the studio to discuss it with us.
Thank you.
Ashish Prashar.